All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome and happy Tuesday. My name is Cristada Ramirez, and I would like to welcome you all to today's NTAC session titled Working Holistically, Foundations of Islamic Psychology. We're so happy that you're taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. As we're getting started, before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items to go through with you. But we would love to see who's in the audience. So if you want to go ahead and use the chat to put your name, your organization, your role, and where you're joining us from, that would be great. But let's get through the housekeeping items very quickly. Next slide, please. All right, as part of our session, we must provide you with this disclaimer. This presentation was prepared by NTAC under a cooperative agreement from SAMHSA. While this event is supported by SAMHSA, the contents are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official views of SAMHSA, HHS, or the US government. Next slide, please. Although we hope that there are no security issues during the session or ever, if that does happen, this session will immediately end and you will be notified by email on how to rejoin a new session. Next slide, please. And thank you again for joining one of our NTAC sessions. This is part 2 of the Heartwork series. So excited to have you here. Listed on the screen are all of our incredible national partners that have come together to utilize their expertise and their subject matter knowledge to help inform the field and enhance the behavior and mental health field. Next slide, please. I normally like to go through this pretty quickly, but going a little bit more quickly so we can dive into our content. But just so that you all know about our vision and services, as a center, our vision is that all children, youth, and families living with and impacted by mental health challenges will have access to the resources and opportunities they need to thrive in a comprehensive and equitable system of care. We serve a wide cross-sector audience, and our services range from individual consultation to more in-depth sessions like the one we're offering you here today, to peer learning exchanges and tools to help you. Please make sure to check out all of our resources and archive presentations on our website. And on the website, you can go to the Contact Us link that is on the site there to request consultation or training. Next slide, please. And then here are some of our commonly asked questions. You will get a certificate of completion after this event that you'll get emailed to you automatically. If you have joined through phone, please email Joanne Bloom to report your participation. You will also get a copy of the presentation emailed to you, and then as well as a copy of the recording for this event. Next slide. Alrighty, well, we got through all of the housekeeping items, and now we can dive in to the session, Working Holistically, Foundations of Islamic Psychology. Also, thank you all for your patience. We had a few difficulties to start us off, so thank you all for your patience, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Sadif, who will get us started into the presentation.
Thank you so much, Crystal. I'm assuming everyone can see me and everyone can hear me. Fantastic. Crystal, Joanne, can I ask you to just keep an eye on the chat in case there's a question comes up? You're welcome to just interrupt me or find a moment that feels right for yourselves. Thank you so much. So welcome everyone. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I think it's a good idea to arrive physically and spiritually, emotionally in a session of this kind of nature. For me, one of the most important things in the work that I do is my presence. And one of the foundations that we'll see as we work through today's session is that we'll take all the philosophy and all the psychology and everything else as we go through it. But one of the key fundamental aspects of all of this is the presence. that we share, the presence that we bring to the sessions that we run, deliver, take part in, contribute in, engage with, whatever, however we choose to describe it. You'll hear from my accent. I'm not from America. I am actually coming to you live today from London, and inshallah, I think the next session, by the time I'm delivering session number 4, or overall for my second session, I'll be back in the US. I'm based over in Arizona usually, but I've just had to be in London for today due to some family circumstances that have come up. So welcome everyone. This is our agenda for today. We're going to go through a few quick disclaimers. We're going to look at some philosophy, ontology, epistemology, very quick stuff. We're not going to spend a massive amount of time on that. We're also going to look at a little bit of history, thinking, then moving on to modern Islamic psychology. Where you see IP, that means Islamic psychology. We'll look at one particular model, and I'll explain why we're only going to look at one particular model when we get there. And then we're going to look at that in practice. And throughout this session, there'll be opportunities for everyone to have conversations with one another in groups. There'll be opportunities to ask questions. There's a slightly bigger group than I was expecting. So if you do have questions, if you drop them in the chat, and I'll either answer them as they come up or answer them when I think it fits in with what's going on. And some of the questions that I think really good questions, but might not necessarily connect with immediately what I'm speaking about, I might just hold on to them till the end. Okay, so we'll start with disclaimers. This is a very brief overview. This is Islamic psychology is a very old field, but a very young field. It's old because the foundations of it go all the way back to 1400 years ago, the birth of Islam. But it's a very new field because there's a resurgence of the practice. So if we can call it that. And again, I'll explain that as we go forward. But today's session is not sufficient as training for you to begin practice as a therapist, and it's not sufficient for anyone to do this session and then call themselves an Islamic psychologist. And I think the one other really important one is there is no single Islamic psychology, and this just ties into the model of the psyche that I described earlier. Okay. I'd like to start the session with a poem. So on the next slide, you'll see a poem. Some people, I'm told, some people enjoy listening to the poem with their eyes closed. Some people like to read the poem for themselves. I will read the poem out loud, but you're welcome to mute your speakers and read it for yourselves. You're welcome to just close your eyes and listen. You're welcome to follow along, whatever works best for you. And I'll give a bit of context to the poem as well as we get to the end. Okay. It's called The Song of the Reed, and it's written by Rumi. Listen to the story of the reed as it laments the pain of separation. Since they have cut me from my reed bed, my wails bring tears to both woman and man. Those ripped away from their beloved know my song. Having been cut from the source, they long to return. In celebrations, I laugh with those laughing, and in sadness, I cry with those grieving. The divine secrets are not separate from my cries, but only those who are cooked in the fire of love will hear them. These secrets are for the heart, not for the eyes or ears. It is fire, not wind, that makes me sing. If you don't have this fire, you might as well be dead. Oh, how can the uncooked know the majesty of the fire of love? If you meet the uncooked, don't sing, don't preach. Instead, listen to my advice. Say goodbye and leave. This poem is from Rumi's, the works of Rumi is described as the Masnavi. And I've not had the pleasure of going through the whole thing, but as I understand it, the works as collected in that anthology go on for around about 62,000 lines of poetry. The original is in classic Farsi, and I would have used the classic Farsi. Unfortunately, I don't speak the language and I don't want to butcher their language. So on that basis, I decided to go with the English. Of course, when we use translations, there are things that are lost, and you'll hear throughout today's session, I will use some words in Arabic and some words in English. Where I use the words in Arabic, I will do my best to give you a translation. But as I said, sometimes some meaning is lost in translation. Ultimately, the poem here, The Song of the Reed, is a metaphor for the disconnection that we feel when we leave the riverbed, when we're disconnected from the source. The idea here being that there is a sense of pain and loss and grief when we are no longer connected to the place that gives us life, the thing that gives us life, and how there's a sense of longing to return to that. The idea, the connection here with Islamic psychology being there are multiple things, in my personal humble opinion, that modern psychology, Western psychology, if I can use that phrase, is missing. And today, my goal is to share them with you in a way that allows you, empowers you, gives you guys some of the tools to move forward in a different way, in a hopefully more holistic way. We'll start here. How do therapies come about? For some of you, this might well be very something that you're very knowledgeable on already. For some of you might have no idea what this is. But through this particular hierarchy, we see the foundation of everything here is epistemology. When we talk about epistemology, what we're really asking ourselves is, what are valid sources of knowledge? What things can we look at? Can we try to learn from? Can we try to understand? And what are those things? How do we accept them as being valid? On top of that, we then build our ontology. And when we talk about ontology, we talk about what is reality? What does that actually, those valid sources of knowledge that we have, how do they plug in to what the world actually is? Once we have those two key foundations, we then move into theory. Theory here is then, what are our hypotheses? What do these things together, that knowledge and the reality of the world, when we plug them together, what does that tell us about the thing we're examining, the thing that we're looking at? And then we move on from theory, we talk about therapy. And when we talk about therapy, what we're actually saying is, what is the protocol or framework that we're going to use to determine how we're going to move through a particular set of interactions? And here, I'm actually describing therapy as the thing that happens, the intention, the context between the client and the professional. So when we look at the secular, non-Islamic, we look at epistemology. We're looking really for empirical and rational. Now, many of you who do things like cognitive behavioral therapies or other types of therapies, whether it's narrative therapies or anything else, any other type of psychotherapy, you are usually reading through published papers which look at empirical data and focusing on the rational. And by empirical, we're looking at the five senses. When we look at Islamic epistemology, we are also considering the empirical and rational, but alongside them, we're also looking at wahi, which is revelation. In this context, specifically the Quran. For those of you who are familiar with Islam, the Quran is the holy book, believed by Muslims to be the verbatim words of God. And then we also look at other aspects of revelation. These are messages that were given to the Prophet, peace be upon him, which are not captured in the Quran, but captured in a collection of books outside of the Quran, known as a hadith, or ahadith for plural. And then we're also looking at inner knowledge and intuition. And these are the things that we are using to determine we're using as and holding as the valid sources of information. And when we talk about epistemology, ontology, modern ontologies, we look at the biological, we talk about mental activity in the brain. Everyone wants to know about what's going on in the brain, neuroscience and brain imaging. And I have an interview coming up soon with a colleague who, she's not a neuroscientist, but she has an extensive amount of study and understanding of neuroimaging. And there's a conversation to be had about what is it we're actually looking at when we're looking at brain imaging and neuroscience. The word material here refers to the physical. So anything that is here, physical, and I can see it, that's what I mean with ontology. And we look at the limited role of the body and the heart, the body being just this physical thing that we are occupying, and the heart being an organ, simply an organ here in the middle of the chest, or just off to one side in the chest, that pumps blood around the body. When we look at ontology from an Islamic perspective, we look at dhahir and batin, bodily and soul. We look at the material and the immaterial. We look at, so as it from an Islamic perspective, we are very much okay with and hold on to the immaterial, the metaphysical, the things that we can't see. We have the ghaib and the shahad. The ghaib is the things that are hidden, and the shahad are the things that are witnessed. And the dunya and the akhirah, dunya being worldly things here, and akhirah being the afterlife. Now those first and second, they're dhahir and batin, and then ghaib, shahada, dunya, akhirah. These are words in Arabic, and the words I've given you as a translation are very, very, very simplified definitions, just for the purpose of explaining what they mean here. But there is a lot of information that describes what's actually meant by those words. So if we look at this from the point of view, or what I like to do, I'm a visual learner, so I like to put this together here. So above the line, we'll look at Islamic ontology, and below the line, we're looking at secular ontology. And so this is, by the way, I must say this out loud. I know we've got it in the corner here, but my colleague and friend, Dr. Wid Katan, is a psychiatrist in Saudi Arabia. She is a fantastic practitioner. She is incredible in many, many different ways. And I completely just took this diagram from something that she put together. And so I'm just giving her a shout out here. So with secular ontology, we have the scene. So this is what I was talking about, the material. So this pen here, this is a pen. I know it's a pen because when I look at the definition of a pen, this physical thing here matches that. And then we have the world being the space that I'm occupying, the self being me, Sarif, and how I present here in the world. And then there's an overlap, and that is the interaction between me and the world. What does the world do when I appear in a space, and how does the world change, if it does, when I vanish from that space? When we go above the line and we look at Islamic ontology, we're talking here now around the same things, but these are captured in multiple different ways. So on to the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see the unseen. These are things that as Muslims we hold on to, we believe in, things like angels, things like demons, things like things that God has told us through revelation exist, but we can't see them. We also have God, and I've put that here very much as a very much as a sort of symbolism. God will always fall into the unseen, but then you hold on to the interaction between God and the self and God and the world, and then the way that where you see the overlap between all of them. So this is a very, very broad overview. Again, there may be some of you who in this will have questions about this. You're welcome to ask those questions. But I don't want to spend much longer here because the next thing we're going to do is just go into a breakout room. Okay. And we'll have a bit more of a discussion. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask yourselves, or I'm going to, on the next slide, there's going to be 3 questions. We're going to go into breakout rooms, being conscious of time. We'll go for around about 7 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes. So screenshot the next slide, or quickly scribble down the next slide because it'll have a couple of questions for yourselves, and we'll go straight out to the breakout rooms. So these are your 3 questions. What is acceptable knowledge? What is the reality of the world? And how does this matter in healing? Now, this question is not a test about Islamic psychology. This is a question for yourselves as practitioners in the work that you do, the way you show up in the world, the way that your clients show up with you. What does this look? How would you answer these questions based on your day-to-day understanding? I just put my hand up, so I'm going to have to make that go down. But that's those are the questions. I want you to answer them based on what your day-to-day role looks like. Okay. Joanna, are we okay to go straight into the breakout rooms?
Yes, I will open them up right now. If you're unable to participate, feel free to just keep yourself muted in the breakout room, or you can return to the main room.
Okay. And while that's happening, I'm going to put my hand down. Lower hand. There we go. Okay, welcome back, everyone. It looks like everyone's just pinging back into the space. I'm going to ask just 2 or 3 people, just for the sake of time, to unmute themselves and shout out some of the ideas, some of the thoughts that came up in their breakout. So go ahead.
Well, hi everyone. My name's Cecilia, and in our breakout room, we got to talking, and the further we went down on the questions, we got to the second one, and we started looking at the third, and for me, and I said it in the group, it really just all seems to tie back together. Like, my truth is not necessarily your truth, and therefore what works for me won't necessarily work for you. And it matters in healing because we can't expect a blanket fix to fix everything, because everyone's truth and everyone's reality is so different.
Okay, interesting. Thank you, Cecilia. Any other quick contributions before we take those things into account, hold on to them, and move into the next part of our session?
Hi, I'm Carrie Banks from the Brooklyn Public Library, not a therapist, but surprisingly enough, in our group, we got to talking about what is exceptional knowledge. I didn't bring it up. Thinking about knowledge that, comes from all different places. We can't dismiss someone's knowledge because it doesn't come from a place that we know. And so knowledge comes from all over, and it's important to accept that and work with that. That's part of someone's reality.
Interesting.
I think I'm saying that
Yeah.
anyway.
I love it, the focus on the word acceptable in the question. Brilliant. That's really good. That's really interesting. I think we've got time for one more before we move on, but that doesn't mean we have to have one more. But if someone wanted to, now's your opportunity.
We talked about, and I see Denise also unmuted, we were in the same group. We talked about the importance of community, right? As a part of like healing, like the individual coming back into community. And that's like what healing can mean.
Oh, excellent. Community. I love that. That's fantastic. Fabulous use of or interaction and bringing in the idea of community. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Grace.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll move on into the next section. We're going to go back a little bit now and looking into what is psychology. And so in contemporary terms, when we talk about psychology, psychology has this thing where it's like, I am a science. A lot of places, especially in the UK, where I did most of my training, psychology is described as a science. There's a bachelor's of science in psychology, the scientific study of the human mind and its function, and the mental characteristics or attitude or of a person or group, just tying into the idea of community there. But classically, every civilization until the 16th century, without exception, acknowledged the idea of spirit, and the idea of spirit being the metaphysical. And the minute we move into the metaphysical, we no longer are able to be empirical. Quick, just if someone wants to throw it into the chat or shout out, you're welcome to. Does anyone know what happened in the 16th century? Why that might have changed? It would be a philosopher, not a historian, that answers this question. Does anyone want to throw a question and answer out? No? Okay. We'll go with so the answer is, well, the answer as I understand it is the Cartesian split. So René Descartes, who's a famous, infamous philosopher, the idea of I think, therefore I am. Think being kind of this thing that apparently happens up here, and because we think, we are. And this is the Cartesian split, which was kind of when we separated this idea of the thinking person and the feeling person. And we took that feeling person and we screwed it up and we threw it over there, because the next chunk of time of a specific, well, not especially just philosophy, but the next chunk of time was about thinking and thought. And after this is where we start to see this idea of psychology being of the mind. Psyche, actually coming from the Greek, I believe means soul. Greek speakers, people who speak classic Greek can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's actually the study of the soul, not the study of the mind. So this next chunk, now that we know this idea of, or now that we've kind of established the classical idea of psychology, Islamic psychology very much leans into the classical, the idea of acknowledging a spirit. And so with that in mind, this next sort of, activity is a whole group activity. I'm just going to ask a question and I want you to throw out as many ideas as you can. I'm going to scribble them down and we're going to go for a couple of minutes. So this is the question. Unmute yourselves, shout out, or drop your answers in the chat. Go. What have we
Well,
got?
when I see just like a hospital, I feel like it's all like mental. It's all like a mental experience, right? It's just it's like, I mean, all
So,
of the conversations, it's all about like the mental and your perception, right? And then like I'm in America, so like all the medications have mental effects.
okay. So,
Even the way that they're structured,
okay.
it's yeah.
So what things would you think about? And this is, again, a wider question. What things would make it a mental health hospital? What considerations are taken into account when we're putting one? So we've got a couple of answers in the chat as well. Openness and low lighting.
I see a place of rest, but I also see a place of challenge. So I see where
and
of rest, and a place of also challenge, where people are challenging your thoughts, challenging to try something different, giving you a space for voice. So I see it as a place of rest, because sometimes that's what you need, and also a place where there's a lot of challenge and self-reflection and work that has to be done.
Okay, so
So I
place
see
and
it
challenge.
action also, huh?
So rest and challenge. Excellent. Thank you, Denise.
Yeah.
So they're coming through thick and fast in the chat. So I've got um emotional life experiences might be overwhelming, 24/7 monitoring, openness, low lighting, safety of the patient, examine and treat mental processes. That's a really interesting one, Tracy. What does mental health look like for our youth? What does it look like for our youth? That's an interesting question, Erica. I'm not going to answer it just yet. We'll come on to that maybe a bit later. Cecilia, no laces. Oh, okay, that's interesting. No laces. It's also prisons as well, as I understand it. Sterile, clinical from Erin. Very structured, Deborah, thank you. Personally for me, due to personal experience, a negative place. Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that, Erica. Thank you for feeling comfortable and safe enough with us that you were able to share that. Grace, focus on diagnosis. Oh, diagnosis. Interesting. Where people receive treatment and are safe. Okay. It should be a place where you can be safe, but often isn't. Interesting, Carrie. Okay. Modification and behavioral modification. Oh, medication, sorry, and behavioral modification. Okay. Less prison-like. To fix, not heal. Oh, interesting. What is considered mental illness within certain groups of people? Yeah, individualized therapy. Oh, these are really fascinating ones. Okay. Okay, cool. I'm gonna throw out the ones that actually, let me do it this way. I'm gonna give you a list, and prison life with no voice or choice of care, interest, unavailable because of expense. You're tapping onto things. So the next slide is going to be a list of things, and I'm going to explain why they're on that list and what that means for us in today's context. Okay. So this slide here, we're going to look at air quality, water quality, natural light, nature, geography and accessibility, visitation, therapeutics, cost, understanding of the human being, admission, discharge, community care, and understanding. And this is very much just, I'd say, the tip of the iceberg. You'll notice some of the things that we've got in this list are things that were either discussed by the group or thrown into the chat. There's a paper, and it's I'll give you the reference for the paper. You're welcome to read it. It's not that long. It's only about 10 or 12 pages long, but it's a fascinating paper to read. There is a mental health hospital in the world, or was a mental health hospital in the world, which took all of these things into account. And so to make sure that the air quality was the best, the way it was designed and built was they took raw meat and hung it up around the city. And wherever the raw meat took the longest to rot or decay, they decided that the air quality there is better than other places in that town or city. And so that was one of the sort of best areas to have this facility because of the air quality. They made sure there was a river nearby so that there was access to water, clean water, running water, for the people who would be there. There was lots of natural light, so open spaces, windows, there were courtyards. There was nature, so there was plants and flowers and trees and grass and earth and rock. It was located close to within the city so that it was easy to access and people could get to it, but it was also people could visit their loved ones who were there. The therapeutics here on offer were astoundingly what's the word I'm looking for? Forward thinking and groundbreaking. We had music therapy and art therapy and all kinds of things that today we would be like, it's a really interesting new spin on things. It was free. The cost of it was borne by the state. It understood the human being as a metaphysical and physical being. The way you went in was you arrived and said, I'm in distress and I need help. And the time, I like this one, the discharge was, the way they knew that you were ready to be discharged was that you could eat a whole chicken. And when it came to community care and understanding, they realized that people who've been in facilities of this nature for extended periods are often not going to have sources of income and may well find themselves going back into a problematic system. And what that meant was on discharge, they were given money and clean clothes, and it was ensured that they had safe, clean, healthy spaces to live. So they didn't just find themselves back in distress and readmitted into care. And I'm describing a mental health hospital 1400 years ago in Baghdad, modern day Baghdad, Iraq. The paper is by Dr. Rania Awad, and was published in 2019 following the discovery of a whole host of Arabic texts which noted all of these things, and I'll give you the reference for it properly at the end. But it's the title of the paper is Mental Health in the Islamic Golden Era: the historical roots of a modern psychiatry. And when it comes to diagnosis, which was one of the things that came up before, there were descriptions of mental health conditions that if you looked at and read today, you would be forgiven for thinking you're reading the DSM-5. Now, whatever you think of the DSM-5 aside, and whatever you think of it relative to the 4 and the 3 and the 2 and the 1, if you want to describe neuroses, and the way you describe neuroses today is the same way you described it 1400 years ago. You want to talk about OCD today and OCD 1400 years ago. It wasn't, you, like I said, you'd be forgiven for thinking you're reading basically the same thing. So far, we've covered philosophies of Islamic psychology. What do we view as acceptable evidence? How do we view the world? And good quality mental health provisions. Moving into the next section, what we're going to be looking at is an Islamic model of the soul. Before we're thinking a little bit more about Islamic psychology in practice. Now, when I talk about Islamic psychology in practice, I'm going to describe a few of the things that I hold on to and things that I do. But then as we move forward, I want to open it up and I want to have more of a dialogue as we sort of move towards the end of the session, where you can have a think about the things I've discussed here, what that means for you in your practice, and things that you're wanting to take away, things that you want to just hold on to from today's session. An Islamic model of the soul. So the source of this is taken from Cambridge Muslim College, where I studied, and this particular model is put together by someone called Dr. Abdullah Rothman, one of my teachers. It looks quite complicated, but I'll talk us through it. It's not that complicated, he says, but I'll explain it a little bit better. So at the top, we have the akhirah. The akhirah is described as the afterlife. This is what comes after we pass away and leave this world. And in direct connection to that is Allah, the Arabic word for God. It's a very deliberate thing to have shaitan. So shaitan is the Arabic word for devil or demon, Satan, and dunya is a worldly thing. The two are deliberately, the same shape is not used because one is not the opposite of the other. The main thing that we're holding on to, the main thing that we're focusing on as practitioners is that circle in the middle. Okay. I'll talk about the things on the left and the right, but I want you to predominantly just hold on to focus on the bit in the middle. Okay. The first bit, we'll start at the word ruh, which is at the top there, and we're going to go clockwise around. So ruh translates as soul, and this is from an Islamic paradigm. This is the spirit, the soul that's in the body. So this is the metaphysical part of us that means we are living. Without this in the body, from an Islamic perspective, if you have no ruh, you are not a living being. This is something from God. This is protected from God, and this is something that yearns to return to God, which is why it sits in the thing in this circle up here called the fitra. I'm deliberately not going to go into too much detail on it because I don't want to distract from that main thing in the middle. But from an Islamic paradigm, this thing here is the thing that is connected. Remember the story of the reed from beginning? This ruh, you can consider that thing the reed that wants to stay connected to the reed bed. As we move clockwise around, your akal, this is intelligence or thought, cognition, if you like, the intellectual part of us, the things that want, the part of us that wants to rationalize. And then we move down into the nafs, which is just the red circle at the bottom. The nafs is the closest thing to what you might describe as Freud's id, which is this part of us that tends towards impulsivity and joy and pleasure. And your qalb translates to as the word heart, but we're not talking about our physical heart that I mentioned earlier. We're talking about the spiritual and emotional heart. And I talk about heart spiritually, emotionally, because cognition doesn't just happen in our brain. This is not where thinking this is not only the only place where thinking happens. Thinking happens within our bodies as well. We feel our thoughts, which is one of the reasons it's so hard to distinguish between whether this is a thought or a feeling, is because we feel our thoughts and we think our feelings. On the right-hand side, we have this idea of nafs. So that bit at the bottom, the nafs, the playful, mischievous part of us, if you like. We have the nafs al-mutmainna, which translates as the soul at rest. We have the nafs al-amara bil-su, so this red triangle on the right-hand side, and this is the what we talk about, the soul that tends to, or the nafs that tends towards evil. So this is one way of describing is this the impulses, the things that you want to just go off and do without thinking. And from the Islamic perspective, what we're looking at is this idea of what we want being a fight between what our ruh wants, that holding onto the reed bed and believing and holding on to something connected to a source, and the part of us that wants to just be mischievous and playful. And when we look over at the left-hand side, this is more of a consideration of our character, if you like. So the word in the blue triangle on the left-hand side up here, munjiat, translates as like goodnesses or blessings. And then your muhlikat, which is the red triangle here at the bottom, which is like these are your vices like anger and greed and lust and whatnot. And so we have these things that are pulls for us in one direction or the other. That might be a little bit complex to understand. And so what we're going to do now is really just look at that in practice. So we're going to use the next sort of, let's say 5 to 7 minutes of where I'm just going to describe how and why this is all relevant in the work that I do. And then I want to open it out for a conversation between everyone. or a more of a kind of open dialogue, as it were. So what does Islamic psychology look like in practice? So for me as a practitioner, the work is required of me. So where I say us, I mean me as us as being practitioners. The work is required of me as much as it is the clients that I work with. This isn't, you know, I know all the theory and I get to leave myself at the door and I'm here to tell you that this, or, you know, I've got it all together. And I know many therapists and many practitioners. I know fantastic therapists and practitioners who don't work in that way. But there's very much consideration that if someone is coming to me for help, that I put myself to one side and make sure that, you know, I am just there to only help. The baggage that I have stays at the door. Then now that's not to say that in Islamic psychology that I verbalize my baggage, but it's important of me to work on my own baggage as much as I can, so that where necessary, where possible, I'm not using it in my sessions. Thank you, Crystal. There's an emphasis on suhba. Suhba just means companionship. So there's an emphasis on what happens in that relationship. So this isn't necessarily just the relationship itself. It's that there's a thing that happens when two souls meet or multiple souls meet, and we're all sharing it in this room at the moment. Most people haven't said anything in this big room, but there is a thing that is going on where our souls are cognizant and connected to one another. In the work that I'm doing, I very rarely will ever just say, how do you think about that? I'll talk about how do you feel about that? How does that sit with you? What effect and what impact is that having on you materially and immaterially? We consider the psyche. And so where I talk about the soul, where I talk about the modern psyche, the two things are separate. So I'll name them, I'll bring them to life in those sessions. We're cognizant of the fact that we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. This world that we're in is a physical experience for us, but we are spiritual beings first and foremost. From an Islamic point of view, we, the therapists, practitioners, helpers, counselors, librarians, whatever role that we take in this world, whatever hats that we wear, we are vessels. We facilitate healing. We don't administer healing. Healing from an Islamic point of view comes from God. And so it is just happens to be that I'm the practitioner or clinician that was there facilitating that, witnessing. I think some of my colleagues use the word witnessing more than facilitate. I've chosen to go with the word facilitate here. We connect the somatic and the body. We pay attention to the chest and the heart. Apologies for the typo. We recognize that this physical space, the physical body that we're in, is a manifestation of our soul in this world. We talk about, I'm going to reuse the word presence from the beginning again. We cultivate that presence with the client. We're sat there. Not often will I make notes during my sessions. Things that I think are really important, I don't want to forget, I'll make a note of. But the main thing is that I'm witnessing and I'm present and I'm recognizing that this is someone who is in pain or someone who's here to share something, and my role is to be present with them. The next one is the distinction between, I've used the word therapist, but this could be any professional. And the next word there's a sheikh. So sheikh is a term of endearment. It can mean spiritual guide, it can mean teacher, it can mean many different things. But often Muslims will seek a sheikh who is a spiritual guide. We are not spiritual guides. And it's very important that we hold on to that idea that we are there as mental health practitioners and clinicians. And if you're looking for that spiritual guide, you need to seek that from someone who is trained and knowledgeable in that area. we talk about this idea of polishing the mirror, where we're transmitting the states. So we look for bits within us that we see in our clients, and our clients look for bits in us that they see in themselves. And so very often we'll see each other as mirrors. And so it's very important that we make sure the mirror that we're showing is polished, not because we need to put on a facade, but because if it's a tarnished mirror, it's hard for other people to see those bits, those spots of light that need to shine through. And the last one, there's lifestyle factors. It's a graded approach. So this is very much a case of the things that you see in Eastern healing practices, which aren't necessarily focused on just the physical. I can talk about that a little bit more if someone wants to. You can just ask the question and I can go through that as well. But that brings me to the end of my presentation. So there's an open opportunity here for comments, questions, and discussion. But I'm wondering, before we get into that, Crystal, is it worth perhaps just thinking a little bit about what session 2 is going to be about for next time? And we can do and then do we want to do the thank you for joining us right at the end after the discussion, or do we want to have the discussion at the end? What do you think?
Yeah, we can do the thank yous and the reminders at the end. And I think previewing like what it might look for the session on 10/22, I think would be a good idea.
Okay, cool. So before we get into questions and comments then, actually no, let's do this. So can I just check, have we got, is it 25 minutes to the end, Crystal?
Yes, I just need like 3 to 5 minutes. Closer to 3 would be fine for the thank yous and reminders at the end. So
Okay.
yeah, if that includes like the part of the questions and stuff.
So let's go till 20 past then, and then we'll move into next time and then the thank yous in the end. So we've got about 14 minutes. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. There we go. The floor is open. Questions, comments, thoughts, ideas, feedback, critique. Oh, have I just unpinned myself?
I just have is it possible to get that visual that you had? I know that you're going to send it out in the email, but is it possible to get that visual translated?
Which visual? Do you mean the one that had the Islamic ontology and the... Okay, how would you like it translated?
Well, I'm talking about the last one that you had with all the
sorry,
different parts.
The model of the psyche.
Yes.
Okay, yes. All right. I'll do a translation of that before I send that out. So I've lifted that out of the paper that Dr. Rothman published. So that's the language he uses. I'll put the link in so you can read the original paper, because he goes into a lot of detail about it himself. And so actually, if we do it that way around, and then that way you don't need to rely on my translation, you've got the translation from the author himself.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Did you have any specific questions about it now that I might be able to answer?
Unfortunately, no. I'm just so very much a visual person. I kind of have to chew on it and look at it to digest it.
Yeah, no problem. I'll send out the link to the paper. It's free to access, so no copyright issues.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other thoughts, comments? I'm going to go to the chat as well. Oh, you're welcome, Vermilla. Thank you. Thoughts become feelings sometimes. Yeah, thoughts and feelings bleed into one another. I've got a comment from Angela Jones saying that horrifies me. I'm not 100% sure what that refers to. But if we look at the time, I'm going to guess it was when we were doing the section on
the hospital.
Mental health hospitals. Was there a specific thing? Did anyone else spot that when it came up? And I might be able to speak to what Angela was saying, although I'm conscious that she's not with us at the moment, and so I'm not going to load it on as if this is definitely what she was saying.
That was a comment on the hospital.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that was like indirect response to that prison like with no voice or choice or care. I think that's what
Okay.
she did that too.
Okay.
And it may have
Fair.
also
I
been
mean,
after you had explained like this original and like how it can compare to the DSM-5 and how long has passed between
okay,
there, and
yes.
like fear between like, oh, development as humans, like what does that look like that we are in the same place that we were, quote unquote, in different societies, blah blah blah, that horrifies that we're not moved.
Okay. All right. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, that works. So it might be, and this is my interpretation. So this isn't what Angela's saying. This is what I'm, I guess, interpreting from that comment, is that it is horrifying to hear that psychosis today is described in the same way as psychosis 1500, 1400 years ago. So, and this is described in more detail in the paper. So I'll send out the reference for that paper as well. But ultimately, what we're talking about is the understanding that there is a difference between OCD and general anxiety, or there is a thing that we call depression, and it has these characteristics, and it is different from bipolar disorder, which has these characteristics. So it's not that they were saying, oh, you have psychosis. These are a list of criteria, which when we look at them are different to this criteria over here. And so these are two separate things, and we will treat them separately. That's not to say, oh, you have psychosis and therefore here, take these pills, or this is what needs to happen. It's really just the idea that there's a categorization of these things, more so than a reliance or necessity that we must diagnose and label everything. So I hope that's clarified that. Again, my interpretation, not Angela.
Was there any, like you said, there was information uncovered about that hospital that had all of those services. Was there any information on results on if it was as effective as I would think it would be, or if it was just a complete loss and didn't amount?
Yeah, so really interestingly, we talk about like randomized controlled trials in science as like the gold standard, right? Like before the FDA approve anything, before the EMA allow anything to go forward, we need like reams of data that say, you know, we did it with double blind and triple blind and blah, 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 all this stuff. What's really interesting is a lot of the literature that we do still have, again, it's in Arabic or Persian because of the time. But a lot of that literature that we do have still does catalog specific physicians who said, my patient today turned up and this is what was going on for them. This isn't verbatim, obviously. And this is what was going on for them. So I tried this. Okay. Oh, I tried this and it worked. Or I tried this and it didn't work. So I adapted it in this way. And then I tried it and it made this difference. So I then made this adaptation. And so what we're seeing is an empirical or scientific rather approach. So what we look at today as the scientific method actually started that long ago. Now, I'm not saying the Muslims in the Islamic Golden Age were the first to do it, but it's the first records of it that we have. Because I can't see anything. I don't think there's anything that exists from the time of the Greeks where the physicians kept the scientific method in that nature, and certainly nothing before it. In terms of what that means for us today is that we're very much looking at an approach today which uses a scientific method, but loses a big part of being as helpful as I think we can be, because of the fact that there's not as much acknowledgement in the metaphysical, in the soul, in the fact that there is a whole host of things that are going on for people, which we just don't necessarily take into account in the same way, because things like CBT, things like psychotherapy, don't necessarily lend themselves to being able to talk about those things comfortably. I know we have things like Jungian practices and Freud talks about the unconscious or the subconscious, but they don't necessarily go as far as developing a model of a soul. They talk about subconscious practices that happen within human beings. They don't necessarily talk about the whole self, and they certainly don't build into or tie into lifestyle factors, which I can come on to if people want. But they also don't necessarily have a root in anything. I'm going to perhaps be a little bit controversial here. They don't have a root in anything that is meaningfully engaged or tested. So if we look at things like the Quran and Islamic revelation, you can say, oh, this is tested because of these things. As I understand the development of Freud's argument and the development of psychologies that came from Freudian kind of theory, is it very rarely had any meaningful, valid data sets, if I can use that term. I'm sure there's a Freudian practitioner or neo-Freudian practitioner who disagree with me, but I think that conversation should happen outside of this session, just because we've got 4 minutes left. I don't think we'll cover it in 4 minutes.
Well, I really appreciated this, and I know I'm going to hop off camera, and I just didn't want to go dark, so thank you. I have to go now, but thank you.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you. Any other thoughts or questions? And you're welcome to throw this there. I'll throw a question out. You're welcome to answer this in the chat if you'd like. But is there anything that you think from today that you'd like to take away, or something that you want to read about a little bit more, something that was interesting for you that you think this is really, I really want to learn more about this, or I want to reach out to, you're welcome to reach out to me directly as well. I want to reach out and ask these questions. I just don't want to do it in a big group. So you're welcome to throw that in the chat. You can send it to me directly, or send it to either Christelle or Joanne directly, and we'll read it out for you anonymously if you'd rather do it that way as well. Well, thank you, Erica. While we're doing that. Interesting, yeah, the relationship with the metaphysical and trauma-informed practices. We haven't, I mean, I deliberately didn't go into the trauma-informed, but that is a massive thing here. And there is a lot of literature out of there by Dr. Rothman on what trauma looks like from the Islamic perspective. And so if you Google, not Google, if you put into YouTube, Dr. Abdullah Rothman, there's this whole series of lectures that he's done using this model of the psyche, the soul. Let me put his name in the chat, and that way everyone's got it. So if you pop that name into YouTube, you'll get an insane number of responses, and you're welcome to kind of watch a couple of his. A lot of his videos hit the 45 to hour 15 mark. And so you might either need to watch it a few times. You might want to watch it in sort of sections and take notes, whatever works for you. But they're all live webinars and sessions that he's done. And that's like the focusing on the soul itself. But it's a little bit different to this session, which is really just talking about foundation of what Islamic psychology looks like. Okay. So I think with that, I am going to go just back to what we're going to do next time, because it's a little bit different, but I'm also going to be asking for volunteers. The information you share has been very informative, bring a new perspective. Thank you, Brenda. Appreciate that. Let me go back to sharing my screen. Share screen. Share that. Okay. So for next time, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing it's a creative problem solving tool. And so I need a handful of volunteers, and I'll talk about that in a moment. The session itself is focused on a problem solving tool. It's really simple. You don't need any additional resources other than a pen and paper. It's a group activity. It takes less than half an hour to do, like per circle, and it's a fantastic opportunity for you to share your knowledge and expertise with your team, or borrow the knowledge and expertise of your colleagues, facilitators, friends, people you work with. Have a think. I'm not going to ask for volunteers now, but if you're welcome to volunteer yourselves now, we can write down your names and come to you next time. But hopefully you're joining us for the session on the 22nd. We need one person to come along as a problem presenter, one person a facilitator, one person a timekeeper, and other people to volunteer to be the team. The problem presenter or owner is a single person. The top three are single individuals, and then the team is a group of people. We need multiple problem presenters because when we do the big one that everyone observes, we're going to do one like that, and then we're going to do a series of them in breakouts as well. So we need multiple people to volunteer. The problem that you bring coming along is something you get stuck with in your day-to-day work, something that's you're just in a bit of a rut with. You need a few ideas, you want to reflect, you want someone to give a bit of insight and input. So you're welcome. Again, reach out, and if you go, oh, this is the problem, I'll put my email address in. This is what I was thinking of presenting. Is that okay? You're welcome to ask. I'm happy to give a bit of guidance there. Facilitator, this person is the one who kind of says, okay, this is where we are, these are our next steps, and so on. I will support whoever's doing the facilitation in the big group. I'm going to support them while we do it for everyone to watch. And then when we're doing it in the breakouts, I'm going to be hopping between the breakout rooms. Timekeeper, note taker, really simple. You're making sure that everyone sticks to time, and you say, okay, time's up, we're moving on. And then you're also scribbling down notes at the same time. And then the team, I need a group of people who are going to be good listeners and reflectors, and who can share ideas, listen, ask questions, clarify things. So have a think about whether or not you want to do any of those positions. They're really simple. I'm going to talk us through how the solution circle works. And the first one we do as a big group, we're going to pause if we need to and ask questions as we go along, because that's how we're going to learn. And then we're going to do a few breakouts so that people have the opportunity to do 2, 3, 4 of them before we close. That's it from me for what I need for you from the next session. I'm going to hand over to Crystal, and we're going to wrap. I hope that's okay. If you've got any questions, you're welcome to just drop them in the chat directly to me, or I'll put my email address. You can email me as well. But over to you.
Thank you, Sadif. Great presentation, and thank you all for joining us today. If in case anyone missed the beginning of the session, we did want to remind you again to be on the lookout for the follow-up email that you'll receive after today's session. That email will include your certificate of completion, a link to the recording of this session, and a copy of the slide deck as well. I know I've seen a few folks in the chat ask that. But again, thank you. Next slide, please. we'd love to hear your feedback. It's really important to us, and is part of our quality control and to our future funding of this project. So if you could please take a few minutes to let us know your thoughts, we'd super appreciate it. There are 3 ways to fill out this survey. One is the link will be put in the chat. After the session ends, when we close out of Zoom, it'll automatically pop up in your browser, and they'll also be provided in the follow-up email after the session. So if you could please take a few minutes to complete that, we'd greatly appreciate it. Next slide, please. And stay connected with us. On our website, you can access our upcoming events, such as the next session to the Heartwork series, which will happen next Tuesday at the same time. You can look at our archived recording. So this recording will also be on there eventually. You can request support, take a look at publications and resources, as well as sign up for our newsletter. And on the right there, you can see all of the different ways to get social with us as well. Next slide, please. And then there's our contact info. So that's a wrap, folks. Thank you again to Sadif for a great presentation. Like he mentioned, there'll be there's another session connected to this on October 22nd. And next week we'll have a session that's part of the Heartwork series as well. So please join us back next Tuesday and the following Tuesday. And thank you all for your attendance and participation in this presentation. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.